Greetings, everyone. This is your friend Pastor Mark, bringing you now chapters 15 and 16 of The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom with John and Elizabeth Sherrill. This is taken from Christian Classics, which is a production of the Bible Broadcasting Network. And now, let's begin.
Pause, F-bar button, Alt, P, Control plus P.
From the studios of the Bible Broadcasting Network, we present Christian Classics, reading from a book that has influenced the lives of many people. Our narrator is Lynn Brooks.
Today we'll be reading chapter 15 from The Hiding Place. It was getting harder and harder to find safe homes in the country for the scores of Jews who were passing through our underground station by early 1943. Even with ration cards and forged papers, there were not enough places for them all. Sooner or later, we knew we were going to have to start hiding people here, in the city. How sad that the very first should have been the dearest of all. It was in the middle of a busy morning in the shop when Betsy slipped through the workshop door. "Harry and Cato are here," she said. We were surprised. Harry had never come to the Bayet in the daytime because he feared his yellow star would cause awkwardness for us. Father and I hurried behind Betsy up the stairs. Harry DeVries related the familiar story. The visit the evening before from an NSB Quisling, the announcement that the shop was confiscated. Who cared if Harry were a Christian? Any Jew can convert to avoid trouble, the NSBer said. This morning, the appearance of a uniformed German to make it official. The shop was closed in the interest of national security. "But if I am a security risk," said poor Harry, "surely they will not stop with taking my store." Doubtless they would not. But just then there was absolutely no available place outside the city. In fact, the only underground address we had at the moment was the home of a woman named De Boer, not 4 blocks from the Bayet. That afternoon, I knocked on Mrs. De Boer's door. She was a dumpy woman dressed in a blue cotton smock and bedroom slippers. We supplied Mrs. De Boer with ration cards and had arranged an emergency appendectomy from there. She showed me the living quarters in her attic. 18 Jews were staying there, most of them in their early 20s. "They've been cooped up too long. They sing and dance and make all sorts of noise. If you think one more couple is too much, no. How can I turn them away? Bring them tonight. We'll manage." And so Harry and Cato began their life at Mrs. De Boer's, living in one of the narrow dormers in the attic. Betsy went every day to take them some homemade bread, a bit of tea, a slice of sausage, but Betsy's main concern was not for the morale of Harry and Cato. It was for their very lives. "They're in danger, you know," she told Father and me. "It's true that these young people are at the bursting point. This afternoon they were making such a commotion I could hear them down on the street." There were other concerns that bitter gray winter. Though there was little snow, the cold came early and stayed late, and fuel was scarce. Here and there in the parks and along the canal, trees began to disappear as people cut them down to heat cook stoves and fireplaces. The damp, unheated rooms were hardest on the very young and the very old. One morning, Christoffels did not appear for Bible reading in the dining room, nor later in the workshop. His landlady found him dead in his bed, the water in his wash basin frozen solid. We buried the old clockmaker in the splendid suit and vest he had worn to the 100th birthday party, 6 years and another lifetime ago. Spring came slowly. We celebrated my 51st birthday with a little party in the DeVries alcove home. It was 1 week later, April 22nd, that Cato arrived alone at the Bayet. Inside the door, she burst into tears. "Those foolish young people went crazy. Last night, 8 of them left the house. Naturally, they were stopped and arrested. The boys hadn't even bothered to cut their sideburns. The Gestapo didn't have any trouble getting information out of them. The house had been raided, she said, at 4 o'clock that morning. Cato was released when they discovered she was not Jewish. But everyone else, Harry, Mrs. de Boer, too. Oh, what will become of them? For the next 3 days, Cato was at the Haarlem police station from early morning until curfew, pestering Dutch and Germans alike to let her see her husband. When they sent her away, she stepped across the street and waited silently on the sidewalk. Friday, just before the noon closing, when the shop was crowded, a policeman pushed open the street door, hesitated, then continued back into the rear room. It was Rolf Van Vliet, the officer who had been here when our ration cards were first delivered. He took off his cap, and I noticed again that startling orange-red hair. "This watch is still not keeping time," Rolf said. He took off his wristwatch, placed it on my workbench, and leaned forward. Was he saying something? It was all I could do to hear. "Harry de Vries will be taken to Amsterdam tomorrow. If you want to see him, come promptly at 3 this afternoon." And then, "Do you see? The second hand still hesitates at the top of the dial." At 3 that afternoon, Cato and I stepped through the tall double doors of the police station. The policeman on duty at the guard post was Rolf himself. "Come with me," he said gruffly. He led us through a door and along a high-ceilinged corridor. At a locked metal gate, he stopped. "Wait here," Rolf said. Someone on the other side opened the gate and Rolf passed through. He was gone several minutes. Then the door opened again and we were face to face with Harry. Rolf stood back as Harry took Cato into his arms. "You have only a few seconds," whispered Rolf. They drew apart, looking into each other's eyes. "I'm sorry," said Rolf. "He'll have to go back." Harry kissed his wife. Then he took my hand and shook it solemnly. Tears filled our eyes. For the first time, Harry spoke. "I shall use this place, wherever they're taking us. It will be my witness stand for Jesus." Rolf took Harry by the elbow. "We will pray for you many times every day, Harry," I cried as the gate swung shut. An instinct which I shared with no one told me that this was the last time I would ever see our friend, the bulldog. That night we held a meeting about Rolf. Betsy and I and the dozen or so teenage boys and girls who acted as messengers for this work. If Rolf had risked his own safety to tell us about Harry's transport, perhaps he should work with us. "Lord Jesus," I said aloud, "this could be a danger for all of us, and for Rolf too." But even with the words came a flood of assurance about this man. How long, I wondered, would we be led by this gift of knowledge? I assigned one of our younger boys to follow Rolf home from work next day and learn where he lived. The older boys, the ones susceptible to the factory draft, we sent out only after dark now, and then most often dressed as girls. The following week, I visited Rolf at home. "You have no idea how much it meant to see Harry," I said when I was safe inside. "How can we repay this kindness?" Rolf ran his hands through his bright hair. "Well, there is a way. The cleaning woman at the jail has a teenage son, and they've almost picked him up twice. She's desperate to find another place for him to live. Perhaps I can help. Do you think she could find that her watch needs repairing?" The next day, Toos came to the door of Tante Jan's room where I was talking with the 2 new volunteers for our work. More and more I was leaving the watch shop to her and Father as our underground operation required more time. "There's a funny-looking little woman downstairs," Toos said. "She says her name is Mietje. She says to tell you Rolf sent her." I met Mietje in the dining room. The hand that I shook was ridged and leathery from years of scrubbing floors. A tuft of hair grew from her chin. "I understand that you have a son you're very proud of." Oh, yes. Meech's face lit up at the mention of him. I took the bulky old alarm clock she had brought with her. Come for your clock tomorrow afternoon, and I'll hope to have good news. That night we listened to our messenger's reports. The long, cruel winter had opened up places at several addresses. There was a place on a nearby tulip farm, but the farmer had decided he must be paid for the risk he was taking. We would have to provide a fee, in silver, not paper money, plus an additional ration card. It didn't happen often that a host would require money for his services. When one did, we paid gladly. When Meecha appeared the following morning, I took a small banknote from my purse and tore off a corner. This is for your son. Tonight, he is to go to the Gravensteinenbrook. There is a tree stump right next to the bridge. They cut down the tree last winter. He is to wait beside it, looking into the canal. A man will come up and ask if he has change for a bank bill. Your son is to match the missing corner and then follow this man without asking questions. Betsy came into the dining room as Nietzsche was grasping my hand in her two sandpaper ones. I'll make it up to you. Somehow, someday, I'll find a way to repay you. Betsy and I exchanged smiles. How could this simple little soul help with the kind of need we faced? And so the work grew. As each new need arose, a new answer was found too. Through Pickwick, for example, we met the man at the Central Telephone Exchange, whose department handled orders to connect and disconnect lines. With a little rewiring and juggling of numbers, he soon had our instrument in operation. What a day it was when the old wall phone in the rear hall jangled joyously for the first time in 3 years. And how we needed it. For by now there were 80 Dutchmen, elderly women and middle-aged men along with our teenagers, working in God's underground, as we sometimes laughingly called ourselves. Most of these people never saw one another. We kept face-to-face contacts as few as possible, but all knew the Bayeux. It was headquarters, the center of a spreading web, the knot where all threads crossed. But if the telephone was a boon, it was also a fresh risk, as was each added worker and connection. We set the phone's ring as low as we could and still hear it, but who might happen to be passing through the hall when it rang? For that matter, how long would curious eyes up and down the street continue to believe that one small watch shop was quite as busy as it appeared? It was true that repair work was in demand. Plenty of legitimate customers still passed in and out. But there was altogether too much coming and going, especially in the early evening. The curfew was now 7 p.m., which in spring and summer left no nighttime hours at all in which workers could move illegally through the streets. It was an hour and a half before that time on the 1st of June, 1943, and I was thinking of all this as I sat impatiently behind my workbench. 6 workers still not back, and so many loose ends to tie up before 7. For one thing, being the 1st of the month, Fred Kornstra should be arriving with the new ration cards. The 100 cards, which had seemed such an extravagant request a year ago, were now far too few for our needs, and Fred was only one of our suppliers, some of the stolen cards coming from as far away as Delft. How long can we go on this way, I wondered? How long can we continue to count on this strange protection? My thoughts were interrupted by the side entrance bell. Betsy and I reached it at the same instant. In the alley stood a young Jewish woman, cradling a tiny blanketed bundle in her arms. Behind her, I recognized an intern from the maternity hospital. The baby, he told us in the hallway, had come prematurely. He had kept mother and child in the hospital longer than permitted already because she had nowhere else to go. Betsy held out her arms for the baby, and at that moment, Fred Kornstra opened the door from the shop. He blinked a moment at seeing people in the hall, then turned with great deliberation to the meter on the wall. The young doctor, seeing what he took to be an actual meter man, turned as white as his own collar. I longed to reassure both him and Fred, but knew that the fewer of the group who knew one another, the safer it was for all. The poor intern gulped a hasty goodbye while Betsy and I got mother and baby up to the dining room and closed the door on Fred. and his work. Today on Christian Classics, we have been reading from The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom with John and Elizabeth Sherrill, published by the Fleming H. Revell Company.
You've been listening to Christian Classics, narrated by Lynn Brooks. This has been a production of the Bible Broadcasting Network. From the studios of the Bible Broadcasting Network, we present Christian Classics, reading from a book that has influenced the lives of many people. Our narrator is Lynn Brooks.
Today we'll be reading chapter 16 from The Hiding Place. Betsy poured a bowl of the soup she had cooked for supper from a much-boiled bone. The baby began a thin, high wail. I rocked it while the mother ate. Here was a new danger, a tiny fugitive too young to know the folly of making a noise. We had had many Jewish children over a night or several nights at the Bayet, and even the youngest had developed the uncanny silence of small, hunted things. But at 2 weeks, this one had yet to discover how unwelcoming was its world. We would need a place for them far removed from other houses. And the very next morning, into the shop walked the perfect solution. He was a clergyman friend of ours, pastor in a small town outside of Harlem, and his home was set back from the street in a large wooded park. "Good morning, Pastor," I said, the pieces of the puzzle falling together in my mind. "Can we help you?" I looked at the watch he had brought in for repair. It required a very hard-to-find spare part. "But for you, Pastor, we will do our very best. And now, I have something I want to confess." The pastor's eyes clouded. "Confess?" I drew him out the back door of the shop and up the stairs to the dining room. "I confess that I, too, am searching for something." The pastor's face was now wrinkled with a frown. "Would you be willing to take a Jewish mother and her baby into your home? They will almost certainly be arrested otherwise." Color drained from the man's face. He took a step back from me. "Miss ten Boom, I do hope you're not involved with any of this illegal concealment and undercover business. It's just not safe. Think of your father. And your sister, she's never been strong." On impulse, I told the pastor to wait and ran upstairs. Betsy had put the newcomers in Willem's old room, the farthest from windows in the street. I asked the mother's permission to borrow the infant. The little thing weighed hardly anything in my arms. Back in the dining room,
66
I pulled back the coverlet from the baby's face. There was a long silence. The man bent forward, his hand, in spite of himself, reaching for the tiny fist curled around the blanket. For a moment, I saw compassion and fear struggle in his face. Then he straightened. "No, definitely not. We could lose our lives for that Jewish child." Unseen by either of us, Father had appeared in the doorway. "Give the child to me, Corrie." Father held the baby close, his white beard brushing its cheek, looking into the little face with eyes as blue and innocent as the baby's own. At last, he looked up at the pastor. "You say we could lose our lives for this child. I would consider that the greatest honor that could come to my family." The pastor turned sharply on his heels and walked out of the room. So we had to accept a bad solution to our problem. On the edge of Harlem was a truck farm which hid refugees for short periods of time. It was not a good location since the Gestapo had been there already, but there was nowhere else available on short notice. 2 workers took the woman and child there that afternoon. A few weeks later, we heard that the farm had been raided. When the Gestapo came to the barn where the woman was hidden, not the baby, but the mother began to shriek with hysteria. She, the baby, and her protectors were all taken. We never learned what happened to them. Although we had a friend at the telephone exchange, we could never be sure that our line was not tapped. So we developed a system for coding our underground messages in terms of watches. We have a woman's watch here that needs repairing, but I can't find a mainspring. Do you know who might have one? Which meant we have a Jewish woman in need of a hiding place, and we can't find one among our regular contacts. I have a watch here with a face that's causing difficulty. One of the numbers has worked loose, and it's holding back the hand. Do you know anyone who does this kind of repair work? Which meant we have a Jew here whose features are especially Semitic. Do you know anyone who would be willing to take an extra risk? I'm sorry, but the child's watch you left with us is not repairable. Do you have the receipt? Which meant a Jewish child has died in one of our houses. We need a burial permit. One morning in the middle of June, the telephone rang with this message. We have a man's watch here that's giving us trouble. We can't find anyone to repair it. For one thing, the face is very old-fashioned. So, a Jew whose features gave him away. This was the hardest kind of person to place. Send the watch over and I'll see what we can do in our own shop, I said. Promptly, at 7 that evening, the side doorbell rang. I glanced at the mirror in the window of the dining room where we were still sitting over tea of rose leaves and cherry stems. Even from the side of his head, I could tell that this was our old-fashioned watch. His form, his clothes, his very stance were music hall comedy Jewish. I ran down to the door. Do come in. The smiling, slender man in his early 30s with his protruding ears, balding head, and minuscule glasses gave an elaborate bow. I liked him instantly. Once the door was closed, he took out a pipe. The very first thing I must ask is whether or not I should leave behind my good friend the pipe. Meyer Mossel and his pipe are not easily separated, but for you, kind lady, should the smell get into your drapes, I would gladly say goodbye to my friend Nicotine. I laughed. Of all the Jews who had come to our house, this was the first to enter gaily, and with a question about our own comfort. Of course you must keep your pipe. My father smokes a cigar, when he can get one these days. Ah, these days? Meyer Mossel raised arms and shoulders in an enormous shrug. What do you expect when the barbarians have overrun the camp? I took him up to the dining room. There were 7 seated at the table, a Jewish couple waiting placement, and 3 underground workers in addition to Father and Betsy. Meyer Mossel's eyes went straight to Father. But one of the patriarchs. It was exactly the right thing to say to Father. But a brother of the chosen people. Can you recite the 166th Psalm, Opa? Father beamed. Of course, there is no Psalm 166. The Psalter stops with 150. It must be a joke, and nothing could please Father better than a scriptural joke. The 166th Psalm? Shall I recite it for you? Meyer asked. Father gave a bow of assent, and Meyer plunged into verse. But that's Psalm 100, Father interrupted. And then his face lit up. Of course, Psalm 66 started with the identical words. Meyer had asked for the 100th and the 66th Psalm. For the rest of the evening, I could hear Father chuckling, Psalm 166. At 8:45, Father took the old brass-bound Bible from its shelf. He opened to the reading in Jeremiah, where we had left off the night before, then with sudden inspiration passed the Bible across the table to Meyer. "I would consider it an honor if you would read for us tonight," Father said. Lifting the book lovingly, Meyer rose to his feet. From a pocket came a small prayer cap, and then, from deep in his throat, half sung, half pleaded, came the words of the ancient prophets so feelingly and achingly that we seemed to hear the cry of the exile itself. Meyer Mossel, he told us afterward, had been cantor in the synagogue in Amsterdam. For all his lightheartedness, he had suffered much. Most of his family had been arrested. His wife and children were in hiding on a farm in the north, which had declined to accept Meyer, for obvious reasons, he said with a grimace at his own unmistakable features. And gradually it dawned on all of us that this endearing man was at the Veillée to stay. It was certainly not an ideal place, but for Meyer, nothing could be ideal right now. "At least," I told him one evening, "your name doesn't have to give you away too." Ever since the days when Willem was studying church history, I had remembered the venerable 4th century church father, Eusebius. "I think we'll call you Eusebius," I decided. We were sitting in Tanta Jan's front room with Kik and some other young men who had made us a delivery of forged travel permits, too late to get home by curfew. Meyer leaned back and stared at the ceiling, pensively. He took his pipe out of his mouth. "Eusebius Mossel," he said, tasting the words. "No, it doesn't sound quite right. Eusebius Gentile Mossel." We all laughed. "Don't be a goose," Betsy said. "You must change both names." Kik looked slyly at Father. "Opa, how about Smith? That seems a popular name these days." "It does seem so," said Father, not catching the joke. "Extraordinarily popular." And Eusebius Smith it became. Changing Meyer's name was easy. At once he became Yusi. But getting Yusi to eat non-kosher food was something else. The problem, of course, was that we were grateful for food of any kind. We stood in line for hours, this 3rd year of the occupation, to get whatever was available. One day, the paper announced that coupon number 4 was good for pork sausage. It was the first meat we'd had in weeks. Lovingly, Betsy prepared the feast, saving every drop of fat for flavoring other foods later. "Yusi," Betsy said as she carried the steaming casserole of pork and potatoes to the table. "The day has come." Yusi knocked the ashes out of his pipe and considered his plight out loud. He, who had always eaten kosher, he, the oldest son of a respected family, in fact, he, Meyer Mossel Eusebius Smith, was seriously being asked to eat pork. Betsy placed a helping of sausage and potato before him. "Bon appetit!" The tantalizing odor reached our meat-starved palates. Yusi wet his lips with his tongue. "Of course, there's a provision for this in the Talmud." He speared the meat with his fork, bit hungrily, and rolled his eyes heavenward in pure pleasure. "And I'm going to start hunting for it, too, just as soon as dinner's over." Today on Christian Classics, we have been reading from The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom with John Elizabeth Sherrill, published by the Fleming H. Revell Company.
Play App bar button Alt P Control plus P.
And that will do it for chapters 15 and 16 of The Hiding Place. And again, this has been a production of the Bible Broadcasting Network. You can find them online at bbnradio.org. You can reach them by phone at 1-800-888-7077. That'll do it for this video. Goodbye.